This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions.
Hi, I'm Eric Grant from Sailrite. Today we're going to show you how to make a cushion replacement for a chair like this. And we're going to do it using what we call the boxed corner cushion approach, which should take only about 30 minutes to make a cushion cover for this foam. So this cover, if you can see here, has seams. In other words, a boxing strip that is sewn in at the top and the bottom. Ours is going to be made from a single piece of fabric that wraps around the front and is sewn on the sides and a box corner at each corner.
What's so nice about this technique? Well, typically it can be made from a single piece of fabric if it's an average size cushion. As far as we know, there is no simpler and faster way to make a cushion for a sofa or an armchair like this. To make our cushion, we're going to be using the old foam that's inside the old cover.
All right, we have this cushion ready to unzip it. It has a zipper on the short side, not the long side, which is uncommon for most cushions. Usually the zipper's on the long side at the back. So here is the foam, and it's wrapped in a silk film.
This foam also has a polyester batting wrapped around it.
Okay, we're going to take some measurements of the foam. We're going to get the thickness of the foam first, but since it has batting on it, and especially if it were new batting, you want to put some pressure on the foam and the batting to compress it slightly, then take a measurement. I'm getting 5.5 inches here. So when we take this measurement, we want to compress the batting again. So we want to really find the foam underneath. So I'm going to put a couple pounds of pressure on it from left to right.
This measurement is 30 inches for us.
Same thing with this measurement. Then for this measurement, I'll compress the batting to find the edge of the foam and measure over here, compress the batting. So for this measurement, we get 24.5 inches. I can feel the foam right there. So 24.5 inches. So since we're starting with a foam that is already existing, in other words, we're not cutting new foam, we're going to subtract a 1/2 inch from the width and the length, but not the thickness. So usually the zipper goes on the long side at the back of a cushion, so this would typically be the length, but in this application the zipper goes back here. So because of that, I'm going to enter this measurement as the length and the long measurement as the width on the Sailrite Fabric Calculator.
To make this 30-minute cushion, visit the Sailrite website and scroll all the way to the bottom of the website. There you will find a resource called Fabric Calculator. Click on that. Then click on Cushions. Here you will find a variety of cushions. Click on Box Corner Cushions, the 30-minute cushion. So here's the fabric calculator, and we enter our finished width and our finished length. And remember, the length side will have the zipper. For us, the length side is shorter than the width side, which is uncommon. And the thickness of our foam plus the batting is 5.5 inches. The fabric we're going to use is 54 inches in width, and we hit the calculate button. Now the calculator gives us the key dimensions, which we will discuss later on, and a list of materials that you can purchase from Sailrite to make your cushion. Scroll down a little further and you'll see the panel rendition. This is what our cutout fabric will look like. The red sides are the zipper. Our fabric is a solid, so it has no pattern or stripe, but if you have a pattern or stripe, you may want to play with orientation. This will orientate the panel differently on your cut fabric. Hit the question mark for more details on that. So instead of width, we'll click length and then hit the calculate button, and you'll notice down below, the panel is now horizontal. But notice it says 2 lengths, and there's a black dotted line in the middle. That means we have to join 2 panels together, and we don't want to do that. Sometimes it will be required, but if we switch it back to width, it is not required, so that's what we're going to do. We have our measurements placed in the Sailrite Fabric Calculator. It's now time to cut our fabric to size. The Sailrite Fabric Calculator will also show you a list of materials and the required amount of materials you need for your particular cushion. Click on one of these links here, like decor and upholstery fabrics, and you can select from thousands of gorgeous fabrics that will work great for your cushion application. We'll go back to the fabric calculator and look at it on a computer for easier reading. If we look at the cut size of fabric, ours is 72.14 by 29.95, and the 29.95 side runs along the width of the fabric. It will be the zipper
So our
opening.
fabric is turned wrong side up on the table here, and we have placed it so that the width edges are this edge and this edge. This is the running length of the fabric. We're going to be using a vinyl fabric that's available from Sailrite called Eversoft. If you look at the texture, it's gorgeous. It looks like leather. It is a faux leather made from vinyl, and the backside has a very soft backing, and it's a four-way stretch vinyl.
We're marking on the underside of the fabric. We're marking to the correct width. We're just using a pencil to strike the fabric. Just because we're showing making this sofa cushion out of a vinyl fabric called Eversoft, available from Sailrite, doesn't mean you can't use a woven fabric. Sailrite has thousands to choose from.
Vinyl fabric can be cut with scissors. It does not unravel, and it is very important that the fabric be square. So we're cutting this edge off that was cut by the Sailrite when they rolled out the fabric because it's not perfectly straight. We have straightened it here.
Vinyl fabrics don't unravel, but what about fabrics that do?
Some fabrics unravel fairly easily. If I cut this with scissors here, and then if I pull on the fabric, you can see lots of unraveling. If a fabric does this, you may want to choose to cut it with a hot knife to prevent this. Even though this will be on the inside of the cushion, stragglers like this can be cumbersome inside a cushion. So I recommend cutting a fabric that does this with a hot knife. We place the tempered cutting glass on the bottom side, then we can use our hot knife without causing damage to the tabletop surface below. And it's also a very smooth surface for cutting the fabric.
Now that our fabric's cut to size, we're going to concentrate on cutting corner notches.
So here's the panel rendition with our panel laying vertical, as you can see here. If we scroll up to the key dimensions here, our first task after cutting the fabric to size is to cut corner notches 2.48 inches wide by 2.6 inches deep. So wide, if you go down to the rendering, is this direction, and deep or length is this direction. It also says it right here in black. Same thing.
To understand the width and the depth, look at the panel rendition in the fabric calculator. The width will always be along the top, and the depth will always be going up and down in the fabric calculator. However, flip the orientation to length, and your panel flips. So the width is still at the top, and the depth is still coming down the sides. But since the panel flipped, the corner notches and center notch orientations have changed, so you'll need to pay attention to that. This illustration should help, depending on whether your panel is vertical or horizontal. Notice that the orientations for the corner notches and center notches change between the two. Our example is vertical.
So 2.48 on the width. Width is this way for us. And for us, 2.6 on the length this way. So it's important to use a clear acrylic ruler because these lines have to be parallel with the edge of the fabric. And I have it exactly where I want it. So I'm going to mark the fabric. Again, for us, this is width, and this is depth or length. A shortcut is to draw an arrow and label it W for width and an arrow for D for depth. So now we can use this cutout piece as a template for all the other three corners. So we'll place our template on this corner, and we can either trace around it or we can simply just cut.
We'll cut out all four corners like this. We will not show the remainder. Next up, cutting center notches.
For the center notches, we're going to fold our fabric directly in half and line up the edges to find the center. Now we can fold that fabric and use a pencil and mark right along that fold on this side and also this side. Then we can open up the fabric and we know where the center is. Now we're going to concentrate on the center notches, and it says 2.48 on fabric width and 3.95 on fabric length or depth. So here's my center notch where I folded the fabric in half. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure for us the width, which is 2.48. So right about there. And I'm going to place a mark here. Now we need to have the depth or the length, because this is the running length of my fabric, we need this mark to be centered. And that measurement for us was 3.95. So basically a little bit less than 2 inches. 2 inches would actually work because it doesn't have to be exactly right. So I'm 2 inches from the mark there. I'll place a mark here. And then obviously I'm going to position it a little bit less than 2 inches on this side. So at 4 inches I place a mark here. Now this center notch is centered between this rectangle. Now I'll strike my lines, making sure that my lines are parallel with the edge of the fabric. Now we can cut this out and we can use it on the other side as well at the center notch on it to create the center notch for the opposite side.
Believe it or not, that's all the cutting that we really need to do on the fabric. We have 4 corner notches and 2 center notches. We're now ready to install the zipper. That's coming up next. You need to look at the panel rendition for your cushion. The zipper will always be shown in red, so those are the sides that we'll mark.
The allowance for the zipper is always 0.62 inches. Multiply that times 2 and we get about a 1 1/4 inch. So I'm striking a line where the zipper would go 1 1/4 inch up from that edge using the clear acrylic ruler. And we'll do that to both sides. We're going to be applying a 1/4 inch basting tape to the underside of this vinyl fabric right along the edge so that we can baste it in place so it has a nice fold for the zipper. So we'll peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue, and then we'll fold it, matching the edge of the fabric up to the line that we struck on the fabric.
Whether you have a vinyl fabric like this or a woven fabric, the process is done in exactly the same way using that seam stick.
We'll do this to both sides or ends. We ordered our number 5 coil zipper from Sailrite. You'll notice the teeth are on this side, and if you look at the underside, there are no teeth there. So this is the outside of the zipper. We're going to apply double-sided tape 1/4 inch to both flanges with the zipper teeth facing up. We want to get this double-sided tape and keep it as far away from the zipper's teeth as possible. That way, when we sew, we don't see the double-sided tape after the sewing is done.
This double-sided tape from Sailrite is special for upholstery applications. It's an acrylic glue. It does not yellow over time.
We'll peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue, and then we will baste this zipper, this half of the zipper, so that there's at least 1 to 2 inches hanging off of the end like this. And what we want to do is we want to baste it down to the edge of the vinyl or the fabric that you're using. Right where that fold was made, basically the raw edge of the fabric that was folded back. If you flip the zipper around, you can see that that almost puts the fabric almost to the center of the teeth. I don't need all this extra. I only need 1 to 2 inches hanging off of the edge, so I'm going to cut off the rest. Now I like to baste the opposite side with the zipper still attached. So I'm going to flip the fabric up like this, and then I'm going to pull this one towards it. Then what I'll do is I'll peel off the transfer paper on the other side of the zipper's flange. And then what I'll do is match up this edge with that edge of the fabric as I baste it, and we'll also make sure that the folds are directly on top of each other. So that conceals the zipper perfectly.
We actually want the folds across from each other so they're directly next to each other, not on top of each other, as I said.
And if you've done it correctly, you should come to the other end and it'd be almost perfect. Now, if you find that you're off by about 1/8 inch or so, don't panic, don't make modifications unless you can actually straighten this panel out and make that offset a little bit more even from side to side. This won't cause any problems at all. Now I'll take my fingers and I'll pull the zipper apart and then insert my finger in here to separate the two halves. The zippers are still installed or basted in place.
To sew this cushion, we're going to be using the Sailrite UltraFeed LSZ1 sewing machine, and it's set up in the UltraFeed collapsible sewing table.
We're going to set our stitch length at about 4 millimeters. We're also going to move our needle position on this Sailrite UltraFeed LSZ sewing machine to the right. Now we're close to the zipper, so we're going to start sewing a little bit off of the zipper and do some reversing right at the end.
Because the hem is basted in place and the zipper is basted in place, this step is very easy.
Now we'll just sew right along those zippers' teeth all the way down the length. When you get to the other end, do a little bit of reversing. We'll do the same thing to the other side.
When sewing the other end, we'll start from the other side. This way it keeps the zipper on the same side of the presser foot, which is highly recommended. Now we simply sew the two sides. That's next.
Now we want to apply basting tape here and here, not there and here.
If you like this video, please do us a favor and give it a thumbs up.
Keep it close to the edge. Then we'll apply basting tape here because we won't be able to get to these very easily after it's sewn together. So right along that top edge here, and we'll do the same thing over there. And then we also want to put basting tape here, but we want to stop it about 1/2 inch from this edge. So I'll baste it here and rip it about 1/2 inch away from this edge. We'll do that on all 4 corners. We'll peel off the transfer paper to these 2 sides, not to any of the corners or the middle cutouts. Then what we'll do is we'll flip this so that outside surfaces are facing each other and fold it matching up the 2 edges and then baste it in place.
If all your cutouts are done appropriately, they should line up directly on top of each other. So it needs to be folded directly in the middle as you see here.
I'm going to put the Deluxe 5.5 inch magnetic guide at the 1/2 inch mark so I can sew my 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I can use this as kind of like a table saw's fence. Then I'm going to sew down both those long edges here. You must make sure that the needle's at the center position for this sewing machine so you get a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Don't leave it at the right position. When we start sewing, we want to do some reversing here. That's very important because that'll come under some stress.
It is exceptionally important that you take a 1/2 inch seam allowance. If you don't take a 1/2 inch, your cushion will not be the right size when done. The calculator insists on it. We're using the world-famous Sailrite UltraFeed LSZ1 sewing machine. This is a heavy-duty walking foot sewing machine, and it's set up in the collapsible work table.
Then when you get to the other side, you'll want to do some reversing there as well. Now we'll do the exact same thing to the other side.
We will not show that. Next up, sewing the boxed corners. Before we can do that, we need to install the zipper slider.
Now we're going to install the slider. Right now the zippers are apart. We need to install the slider so the puller is down, or the slider puller is down. So we're going to insert the fat end onto the zipper's teeth, and then the other end into that same end on the opposite side. Match them up. I've got basting tape on there so it's sticking to my fingers. And then push it into place. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, if I can find the slider, there it is. I'm going to actually pull this slider all the way through the zipper to join the 2 halves of the zipper back together again. And I'm going to pull it right off of the other end. Okay, so now the zipper's together. Now what I'll do is I'll separate the teeth a little bit here and feed it back on in the same manner.
You may be saying, what did they just do? Well, what we did is we joined the two halves of the zipper together, and now we want to reinstall that slider with the two halves joined together and leave it in the middle position.
So now with the slider in position, we'll just push the slider so that it's midway somewhere around like that.
Joining the two halves of the zipper make it easier to sew the box corner.
So now what we want to do is we want to match up these corners. And to do that, we're going to peel off the transfer paper or the double-sided tape on the inside, revealing the glue. Then I'm going to grab each one of the corners and splay it out so it creates kind of like a triangle. And my goal here is to match up the edges from each corner. There, just like that. So what you've got is you got a piece that looks like this, and with the 1/2-inch seam allowance, it should come out almost perfect like this. We're going to do the exact same thing for this corner that we just did for that one. You can go ahead and cut the excess zipper off if you'd like, just so that it's flush with the edge of the fabric at this cutout. Now what we'll do is we'll peel off the transfer paper, and it's on two sides on this one. So here, and if the paper's stuck into the seam allowance, don't worry about it. You can just leave it in there. And here. Same thing here. We're going to create a triangular edge here, matching up the two sides, folding right on that edge. Now, we really want this seam allowance to be right in the middle of this zipper. So that's going to be my goal, is to get this right in the middle of that zipper. If I have to, I'll peel it up and manipulate it just so I can do that. Looks good there. Now we got to work out this little bump here. There we go. So notice the seam is right in the middle of the zipper. That's what we want. Now we'll do the same thing to this side. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to grab this kind of in an exaggerated way. So I'm grabbing it clear back here, and it looks great. There are no bubbles or wrinkles. Now this flange, I'm going to sew it down like this. The idea here is that when you go to the other end, the zipper, we want it to really be the same fold on this end as well. Now don't panic if you get one going up and one going down. It won't be a big deal, but try to get it going the same way. We're going to start with this corner. So it's splayed out nicely. We want to sew a 1/2 inch from this edge of the fabric. I'm using my Deluxe 5.5-inch magnetic guide to determine that. I'm going to bury my needle, and I'm going to do some reversing here at the going off the fabric by 1 stitch or so. So sew forward, and then reverse. I went off the fabric a little bit. That's quite all right. I'm going to sew with the seam allowance down, and then I'm going to sew off the fabric and do some reversing there. That corner is done. And here's what it should look like on that side and also that side. Seam allowance is tucked this way. I'm going to do the zipper over here, so it's going to tuck the same direction. But I'm going to have my zipper so it's up. So I'm going to flip the assembly, holding my seam allowance so it's folded the same direction. And I'm going to splay this out, which means I'm going to splay it out further into the fabric. There we go. Tail's tucked the right way. Put this into the sewing machine. You notice some fabric sticking out here. Not a big deal. I'm actually going to move my Deluxe 5.5-inch magnetic guide, and I'm going to use the 1/2 inch mark on the needle plate to determine where that is on this fabric, the one that's furthest in. Bury my foot, or lower my foot I should say. And again, we're going to sew. Doing some reversing, sewing 1 or 2 stitches off. And then this, to reinforce the zipper, I'm going to take some of that scrap that we cut out, and I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to lay it right over top of the zipper like this, so that its edge is right on the edge of the fabric. It doesn't have to be, but that way I know where that edge is. I'm going to sew through it carefully. And then when I get to this side, I'm going to do the reversing again. And this side is done. Now we'll do the same thing to the other zipper and the other corner. We will not show that since the process is done exactly in the same manner.
This results in a corner that's actually a ½ inch thinner than the thickness of the foam, which results in a better fit. Now we'll insert the old foam in the new cover.
Now what we'll do is we'll open up our zipper, and you can just do that by ripping the zipper apart at the slider all the way to the ends. And we'll turn the assembly right side out by grabbing on the inside and turning it. Now you want to push out the corners, so put your hand on the inside and find your corners and make sure you push those out. We've laid out silk film, which comes on a roll like this, and it's center folded, so when I unfold it, it's 54 inches wide. And I've laid it all over the table. So now what I'll do is I'll take my foam and I'll place it on the silk film and start wrapping it with the silk film. So I have my cushion cover ready to accept the foam. The silk film is so cheap, you might as well use a large amount of it, otherwise you're going to be struggling with this. So I have a lot of overlap. This is the end where the zipper goes, so I'm going to insert the hose directly on the foam. And then I'm going to push fairly hard on it. And this should compress the foam. If it's a high density, it won't compress as much. This is a medium density. I should have wrapped it around the sides. I didn't do that. There we go.
Is silk film required? No. You can see here though, if you use silk film in a vacuum, it does compress the foam, so it makes it easier to slide it into the cushion cover. If the cushion were used in a wet environment, the silk film is also another barrier to help prevent water from getting to the foam. If silk film is not used, you still can wrestle the foam into the cushion cover. It'll just take a couple more extra minutes.
And it will start to come back to size, but before it does, we'll get it in the foam, in the cover. Now we want some air to escape, and we'll be cutting some of this away because we don't want this to get caught up in the zipper, but we're going to let it sort of expand before we do that and make sure that the foam's filling the corners. So I'm going to let some air out. There we go. Now the foam's coming back. Now cutting away the excess at the end is important for two reasons. For one, you don't want the cushion to blow up like a balloon when an occupant sits on it. And for two, you don't want the slider to get stuck in the silk film because it can be a pain in the butt if the zipper gets silk film in it. So we're going to cut away a lot of the silk film at the end. So now we want to tuck this silk film into the cover so I don't get it in my zipper. And this gives us a good opening in the back of the cushion for air to escape and to enter into the foam. Now all we need to do is zip it up. And the little zipper slider can go in between the tucks of the fabric.
We believe that the box corner cushion technique is the fastest way to make a cushion for a sofa or any square or rectangular cushion. And it looks great too. In the next chapter, we'll install vent grommets. It's completely optional and mainly only done when the fabric doesn't breathe. An example of this is if an occupant sits on the cushion and the cushion blows up like a balloon. In those situations, a vent grommet may be helpful.
Our cushion's done, but it's made completely out of vinyl. And if you know anything about vinyl, air does not escape easily from vinyl. To prevent that from happening with vinyl cushions, in the back, usually where the zipper is, we can install some vent holes. We're going to show you how to do that next. So if you'd like, you can just install a hole. We're going to use the Sailrite drill hole cutter to do this, and it works in a drill. We're going to install 2 holes just to allow for good ventilation here, and we want to do it someplace in the center. So I'm going to put the Sailrite cutting block and die holder underneath here so that I could drill through and not hit my fingers, obviously. And I want to put this hole fairly close to this. I do not want it to show up on the top, so I'm going to put it really close to the zipper by about 1/4 inch.
When using vinyl fabric and a firm foam, this may not be required because when an occupant sits on a firm foam, it doesn't compress much.
So if you like, you could just leave the hole at the back of the cushion, but that doesn't look very good. So we're going to install a vent grommet.
Another use for vent grommets is for cushions that are used outdoors. If the foam gets wet, the vent grommet can help provide some ventilation, so hopefully the foam will dry out quickly.
So this anvil goes on this side, and I'm placing on something to protect my fabric. It can be placed on anything. And then this side gets placed onto that anvil. Make sure it's centered on there. It's centered on there well. And then give it a few blows with a mallet. There we go. Very professional look. Now we'll install the second. There we go, 2 vent grommets. So now with the vent grommets, when an occupant sits on it, the air immediately escapes. And it comes back to size right away when the occupant's up.
Coming up next is the materials list and the tools that we used. For this project, we used a vinyl fabric called Eversoft available from Sailrite. However, Sailrite has thousands of woven fabrics that are gorgeous for cushions like this. And we also have the foam if you don't already have foam or if your foam is bottomed out. If you have any questions about any of those products, be sure to give us a call or email us. We're glad to help. It is only through your loyal support to Sailrite that makes these free videos available. Thanks for your loyal support. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.